Silence is often misunderstood. We live in a world where communication is constant, instant, and expected. If you're not replying, if you're not explaining yourself, if you're not defending your point, people assume something is wrong. But silence, when used intentionally, is not the absence of communication. It is communication. It says something deeply powerful. I don't need to engage in every emotional storm. I choose peace over provocation. I choose dignity over drama. When someone sends you a passive-aggressive text or a message laced with anger, it can be tempting to defend yourself, to reply immediately, to explain what they misunderstood or match their tone with your own frustration. And in doing that, we often think we're standing up for ourselves. But in reality, more often than not, we're getting dragged into a fight that doesn't elevate us. It just exhausts us. Silence says, I've seen this pattern before, and I'm not playing the same part in it again. When someone expects you to react, when they push your buttons hoping to get a rise out of you, and you don't give them that satisfaction, your silence becomes a mirror. It forces them to sit with their own behavior, to hear the echo of their words in the quiet, to ask themselves, why didn't they respond the way I expected? And that pause, that moment of confusion, that's where transformation starts. We're not taught this growing up. We're taught that being silent is being weak, being passive, being avoidant, passive, being avoidant. But silence can also be your greatest act of strength because it takes enormous self-control to resist the urge to lash out, to choose maturity when your emotions beg for revenge, to hold your tongue not because you have nothing to say, but because you know saying it in this moment won't bring you peace, only noise. You don't need to prove your worth in a message. You don't need to convince someone of your perspective when they're not ready to hear it. And you certainly don't need to waste your energy explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That's what silence says. It doesn't mean you're done forever. It doesn't mean you'll never have a conversation. It means you're choosing the right moment, not the reactive one. Silence is the pause that protects your power. It's the space where clarity returns. It's where you decide not to let someone else's emotional immaturity drag you into a version of yourself you've worked so hard to outgrow. So next time you're tempted to send that angry reply, ask yourself, what would be more powerful here? Being heard in a moment of noise or being felt in a moment of silence? Because in relationships, the way you handle tension speaks volumes. And sometimes the loudest, most self-loving thing you can do is say nothing at all. Angry texts are not expressions of power. They are emotional leakage. When you're hurt or upset and you reach for your phone to fire off a long message filled with frustration, blame, or sarcasm, what you're really doing is bleeding emotionally. It might feel like release. It might feel justified. But in most cases, it's not strategic communication. It's raw, unfiltered emotion that hasn't been processed. And when you send from that place, you often hand over the very power you're trying to protect. Let's be honest, angry texts rarely lead to resolution. More often, they create confusion, defensiveness, or escalation. You send a long message about how someone has disrespected you, and instead of hearing you, they focus on your tone. You bring up a genuine point, but it gets lost in the emotional charge of your words. Flow. You meant to stand up for yourself, but it ends up looking like an outburst. Why? Because anger, when unrefined, doesn't clarify. It distorts. When you hit send in the heat of the moment, you're not thinking about impact. You're thinking about relief. You want them to know how hurt you are. You want them to feel your pain. But texts aren't containers for deep emotion. They're often too flat, too cold, too easy to misread. And once a message is sent, you can't unsend the energy behind it. What happens next is familiar. Regret sets in. You reread what you wrote and realize it didn't come from your best self. It came from your wounded one. Maybe you even apologize. Maybe you feel embarrassed. But here's the deeper cost. Every time you communicate from that reactive state, you teach people to see you through the lens of your pain, not your power. Emotional leakage doesn't inspire respect. It invites chaos. It invites chaos. And the more you rely on angry text to express yourself, the more you normalize drama as your primary language. That becomes the tone of your relationships. Always reacting, always fixing, always explaining. There is a better way. When you feel the urge to unload in a message, pause. Type it out if you must, but don't send it. Let your emotions settle. Speak your truth, but do it with clarity, not charge. Because when you wait to communicate from a calm, grounded place, your words land differently. They're not fighting for space. They own the space. They own the space. You don't have to be silent forever. You don't have to suppress your feelings. But understand this, true power lies in expression with intention. Not everything you feel needs to be shared in real time. Mastering the timing of your words is what separates emotional maturity from emotional reactivity. So the next time you feel like typing a message just to make a point, ask yourself, is this helping me connect, or is this just a release valve for my own unprocessed emotion? Because once you learn to hold your power instead of leaking it, everything changes. Not every feeling deserves an immediate expression. That may sound counterintuitive in a world that constantly tells you to be honest, speak your truth, or never hold back. But here's the truth that emotional maturity teaches us. Just because you feel something doesn't mean it's the right time or the right way to express it. Feelings are real, but they're not always reliable in the moment. Emotions are messengers, not commands. They rise up in reaction to something, a trigger, a disappointment, a perceived slight, and they often carry the heat of that moment with them. But if you allow every emotional impulse to spill out instantly, especially in relationships, you don't come across as authentic. You come across as unstable, reactive, and emotionally overwhelming. It's easy to say what you feel when you're upset. It's easy to lash out, to vent, to express frustration, to make accusations. But here's the problem. When we speak from the peak of our emotions, we're not communicating for connection. We're discharging for relief. We're not thinking about the impact. We're trying to feel better. And often the words we say in those heated moments become wounds that we can't take back, even if the feeling behind them passes 5 minutes later. Real strength, especially in emotionally intelligent communication, is learning to pause, to sit with a feeling. To ask, is this emotion rooted in truth, or is it coming from fear, insecurity, ego, or past wounds? Because not all feelings are created equal. Some are momentary sparks that fade. Others are long-term patterns that deserve attention. But if you treat them all as urgent, you create chaos in your relationships and inside yourself. This doesn't mean suppressing your feelings. It doesn't mean pretending you're not hurt or pretending everything is okay when it's not. It means giving yourself the grace of space, the time to understand your feelings before you speak them. That space is where wisdom lives. That space is where you decide not just what to say, but how to say it. And more importantly, why you're saying it. Is it to be right or to be heard? Or to be heard? Is it to hurt them back or to help them understand? Is it to prove a point or to protect your peace? People who master communication aren't those who always have the perfect words. They're the ones who know when silence is more effective than speech, when reflection is more powerful than reaction, when timing matters more than intensity. So yes, feel your emotions deeply. Let them inform you, teach you, show you what matters, but don't let them drive the car. You are not your anger. You are not your sadness. You are not your fear. You are the one observing those emotions and choosing what to do with them. And the more you learn to wait before you speak, the more your words carry weight when you finally do. People often assume that what they say is the most important part of communication. But in truth, it's not your words that people remember. It's how you show up, especially in emotionally charged moments. Your actions, especially in silence, speak with far more authority than anything you could write or say. And in many cases, your lack of response carries more impact than 1,000 carefully chosen sentences ever could. When you respond with silence instead of anger, people notice. When you choose not to engage in the drama, people feel the shift in energy. Why? Because most people are used to noise. They're used to reactions, explanations, emotional debates. But when you remove yourself from that rhythm, when you simply stop feeding the fire, your absence becomes a statement. Your stillness becomes a spotlight. People are far more likely to reflect on their behavior when you don't give them the argument they're expecting. Think about it. When someone sends a nasty message, they're often not looking for understanding. They're looking for control. They want to rattle you, to get a rise out of you, to assert dominance in the conversation. And when you take the bait, you reinforce the cycle. But when you don't, when you refuse to engage from that emotional level, something powerful happens. They are forced to sit with themselves. And that silence, that discomfort, that confusion about why you didn't react the way they expected, That's where accountability begins. There is a difference between punishment and presence. You're not using silence as a weapon. You're using it as a boundary. You're not ignoring someone out of spite. You're choosing to remove your energy from conversations that no longer serve your growth. That difference matters, and people can feel it. It's also important to understand that most people are not good at self-reflection, especially when they're used to arguing their way out of consequences. But when you stop arguing, when you stop trying to convince, explain, or justify yourself, you create space for them to hear the echo of their own actions. And sometimes that echo is louder than anything you could have said in the heat of the moment. People learn how to treat you based on what you allow, what you engage with, and what you walk away from. Words can be manipulated, twisted, or dismissed, but your actions, they're undeniable. If you keep saying, "I won't tolerate disrespect," but respond to every disrespectful message, your actions contradict your words. But if you stop engaging, stop replying, and start withdrawing your presence, suddenly your standards become crystal clear, not through what you said, but through what you did. That's the power of silence. It creates a void, and in that void, people finally see what they've been missing. Your value, your peace, your strength. You didn't scream it. You didn't beg for it. You simply became it. And that speaks louder than anything else ever could. Reacting in anger almost always escalates conflict. Tab. It turns a disagreement into a war, a misunderstanding into a battlefield. Anger pours gasoline on already heated situations, and suddenly what could have been a calm conversation turns into an emotional firestorm. That's because anger, when left unchecked, doesn't seek resolution, it seeks release. And when you react from that place, you might win the argument, but you lose the connection. You might get your point across, but you lose your peace in the process. Silence, on the other hand, does something remarkable. It cools the emotional temperature. It interrupts the emotional pattern. It's the difference between someone throwing a punch and the other person simply stepping back. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. That step back is where power lives. Because silence isn't about avoiding confrontation. It's about managing energy. It says, "I'm not feeding this fire." Think about the last time you got into an argument through text or over the phone. You said something out of anger. They snapped back. You responded again. And suddenly, the conversation became about winning instead of understanding. Both people start defending their egos instead of expressing their needs. That's what anger does. It makes everything about a me versus you and takes the focus away from the relationship itself. But when you choose silence, especially in a moment where everything in you wants to react, you do something most people aren't trained to do. You take responsibility for the energy you bring to the interaction. That silence doesn't mean you're weak or you've given up. It means you're emotionally self-aware enough to know that reacting in this moment will only make things worse. It means you're not interested in adding fuel to a fire you don't want to burn in the first place. Here's the truth. Resolution doesn't happen in chaos. It happens in clarity, and clarity requires calm. Silence gives you time to breathe, to think, to regulate your nervous system. It gives you a moment to ask, is what I'm about to say going to move this forward, or just deepen the divide? Most people never stop to ask that. They just react and regret it later. But the person who learns to pause, to stay silent in the heat of the moment, earns a different level of influence. Not control over others, control over themselves. And that control is magnetic. Because in a world where everyone is so quick to shout, to argue, to prove a point, the one who stays calm stands out. Silence isn't about shutting down. It's about staying grounded. It's about refusing to let someone else's chaos determine your character. You can still speak. You can still express how you feel. But when you wait until the storm has passed, your words carry weight, not heat. That's the kind of communication that heals rather than harms. And that's how you build trust, not just with others, but with yourself. In relationships, communication isn't just about what you say. It's about when and how you say it. That's where emotional discipline comes into play. It's easy to speak your mind when you're upset. It's easy to hit send on that long emotional message the moment you feel disrespected or triggered. But emotional discipline is what stops you in that moment and asks, is this the right time? Is this the right tone? Is this even necessary right now? When you exercise emotional discipline, you learn to pause. Not because you're scared to speak, but because you're smart enough to know that words spoken in haste often become regrets. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes a space to process, a buffer that protects the quality of your relationship size. It doesn't mean you're ignoring the issue. It means you're choosing not to let your emotions run the conversation. You're waiting until your heart has cooled, your mind is clear, and your intention is grounded. This is especially powerful in romantic or emotionally charged relationships. When things get heated, when someone pushes your buttons, it can feel like you're under pressure to respond right now. But that urgency is usually your ego, not your wisdom. Emotional discipline teaches you to recognize that urge and override it. It's not about suppressing your feelings, it's about creating space between stimulus and response, and in that space is where self-respect lies. There's a big difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate and emotional. Responding is thoughtful and intentional. When you develop emotional discipline, your silence becomes purposeful. It allows you to choose your words rather than letting your emotions choose them for you. And in that silence, you gain perspective. You might realize the situation doesn't require a response at all. Or if it does, you respond in a way that reflects your values, not your frustration. This discipline is also what protects your peace. Because when you're always reacting, you're constantly pulled into emotional whirlwinds. You lose sleep over text, replay conversations in your head, draft replies you never send. But when you start practicing restraint, when you allow silence to be your first language in conflict, you reclaim your energy. You stay calm not for their sake, but for your own. And here's the beautiful thing. People respect the calm. They might not say it, but they feel it. Your silence doesn't go unnoticed. It signals maturity. It signals strength. And most importantly, it signals that you are in control of your emotional world, not them, not the situation, not your triggers. So the next time you're tempted to react, to respond immediately out of anger or frustration, pause. And that discipline is one of the most powerful tools you'll ever develop, not just in communication, but in life. It's what separates people who constantly battle others from those who've mastered themselves. Silence gives you what anger never will. Time to understand. When emotions run high, our natural instinct is to speak, to defend, to correct, to retaliate. But in those moments, we're not usually seeing things clearly. We're not thinking long term. We're trying to relieve an internal pressure by expressing ourselves immediately, often without fully understanding what we're truly feeling or what the situation actually calls for. Anger rushes us toward reaction. Silence slows us down for reflection. When you choose silence, you're not avoiding the situation. You're creating space for clarity. You're giving yourself the gift of time to breathe, time to think, time to assess what's really going on beneath the surface. Because let's be honest, most of the time, our first reaction isn't our wisest one. It's the emotional one. It's the one driven by hurt, fear, ego, or past wounds. But when you give yourself silence, you start to see what's yours and what isn't. You can separate your pain from your truth. Anger is loud, impulsive, and short-sighted. It's not interested in nuance. It paints in black and white, right and wrong, me versus you. But life, especially relationships, lives in the grey. Silence invites you into that grey, into a space where you can observe without judgment, where you can ask yourself better questions. Why did that comment hurt me so deeply? Am I reacting to this person, or to something unresolved within me? Is this about them disrespecting me, or about me not enforcing a boundary? Those are questions anger won't let you ask, but silence will. In silence, you also learn the difference between what's urgent and what's important. Anger wants you to believe everything is urgent, that you have to speak now, defend now, resolve now. But important things aren't handled in panic. They're handled in patience. Silence allows you to uncover the real issue, rather than fighting over the surface tension. You realize the argument wasn't about the dishes or the tone of a text. It was about feeling unseen, unheard, or unappreciated. And that level of understanding can only come when you give yourself space to feel fully, honestly, without interruption. Silence also allows the other person to reflect. When you don't respond right away, it sends a powerful message. I'm not here to react. I'm here to understand. That pause often disarms the other person. It shifts the energy from combat to curiosity. And sometimes that space gives them time to realize their own part in the situation without you having to say a single word. Ultimately, silence is not a retreat. It's a strategy. It's how you move from emotional chaos to emotional clarity. It's how you understand yourself better before trying to be understood by someone else. And it's how you ensure that when you do choose to speak, your words come from depth, not defense, We live in a world where constant access to communication has made many people believe that silence means something is wrong, that if someone doesn't respond quickly, they're being rude, cold, or distant. But the truth is, silence isn't always about absence or avoidance. Sometimes it's about protecting energy. It's about choosing to step back instead of engaging in conversations that drain, confuse, or diminish you. Silence can be the clearest boundary you ever set, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. When you choose silence in response to emotional chaos, you're telling yourself, I don't need to participate in this to prove my worth. You're rejecting the idea that every comment deserves a reply, every accusation needs a defense, or every misunderstanding has to be immediately cleared up. So instead, you're choosing peace over performance. You're saying, my energy is valuable, and I won't waste it trying to fix what someone isn't willing to meet me halfway on. That's a powerful shift. Because when you realize that not everything deserves a response, you start living with more intention. You stop letting other people's chaos dictate your emotional state. You no longer hand over your peace just because someone else is in turmoil. Silence becomes your filter, the pause that helps you determine whether something is truly worthy of your attention or just another test of your emotional boundaries. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's deeply active. It's you making a conscious choice to prioritize your mental clarity, your inner stability, and your emotional maturity. And often this kind of silence does more than any well-crafted argument could. It sends a message without shouting. It communicates boundaries without explanation. It shows people that your peace is not up for negotiation. Sometimes people will try to pull you into their storms because that's where they feel most powerful. They'll try to bait you into reacting so they can regain control. But when you stay silent, when you stay grounded, you remind them that not everyone can be shaken. You show them that the only energy they can influence is their own, not yours. And this isn't about playing mind games or being manipulative. It's about emotional responsibility. It's about choosing to engage from a place of clarity, not chaos. Because when you don't protect your energy, you end up exhausted, resentful, and disconnected from yourself. But when you learn to hold silence as a boundary, you build a life that feels calm. Not because there's no conflict, but because you've chosen not to invite every conflict into your world. Ultimately, silence becomes a mirror. It reflects your self-control, your self-worth, and your refusal to lower your standards just to be heard. You're not rejecting the person, you're rejecting the chaos. And in that rejection, you're protecting something far more important, your peace. When you choose silence over angry text, you are not just withholding words, you are creating space for growth, both for yourself and for the other person. This space is vital because communication is more than just exchanging information. It's about connection, understanding, and ultimately transformation. When emotions are high and anger is driving the conversation, true growth becomes impossible. The moment you hit send on a message filled with rage or frustration, you risk closing the door to any meaningful change. Growth requires reflection, and reflection requires quiet. Angry texts are reaction. Without this processing, what gets expressed is often hurt, blame, or misunderstanding. It's raw and unfiltered, and while it may feel satisfying in the moment, it rarely plants seeds for improvement. Instead, it often causes wounds that need healing. When you choose silence, you are choosing to hold space for reflection rather than reaction. In that silence, you give yourself the opportunity to examine your feelings with clarity. You can ask yourself questions like, what exactly hurt me? Is this about the current situation, or is it connected to past experiences? What do I want from this relationship? What boundary am I trying to protect? These questions deepen your self-awareness, which is the foundation for emotional growth. You also give the other person a chance to consider their actions without being immediately confronted or blamed, which opens the door to accountability rather than defensiveness. Silence is also a sign of respect for yourself and for others. It shows that you are willing to listen, to give time, and to allow emotions to settle before addressing the issue. It says you value the relationship enough to approach it thoughtfully, rather than impulsively. This kind of respect nurtures trust and safety. creating a fertile ground where growth can happen. It's important to recognize that silence does not mean ignoring problems or pretending they don't exist. Rather, it's an intentional pause, a strategic choice to avoid destructive cycles of anger and misunderstanding. This pause can prevent patterns of conflict from becoming entrenched and can pave the way for more honest, compassionate conversations when emotions are more balanced. When people see that you choose silence over reactive anger, they begin to understand that you are committed to growth, not just in the relationship, but in yourself. They see that you are someone who values progress over victory, healing over blame. This mindset transforms conflicts into opportunities for deeper connection and mutual learning. Ultimately, silence invites growth because it allows time and space for change to occur internally before it needs to manifest externally. It turns impulsive reactions into thoughtful responses and conflict into conversation. Choosing silence over angry texts is not about avoiding problems. It's about facing them with maturity, wisdom, and the willingness to evolve. Silence is a form of strength that often goes unnoticed, especially in a culture that glorifies loudness, immediate responses, and constant communication. But true strength isn't about who can shout the loudest or fire off the most scathing message. It's about who can maintain composure, self-control, and dignity in the face of provocation. Choosing silence instead of sending angry texts is a demonstration of this inner strength, a powerful statement that you are the master of your emotions, not their slave. When you refrain from reacting impulsively, you're showing that you have the emotional maturity to prioritize long-term peace over short-term satisfaction. It takes more courage to stay silent and process your feelings than to unload all your frustration in the heat of the moment. This kind of restraint reflects a deep understanding that not every battle is worth fighting, and not every word needs to be said. In fact, some battles are won simply by refusing to engage. Silence's strength also sends a clear message to others about your boundaries. It shows that you respect yourself enough not to tolerate disrespect or unnecessary drama. Instead of escalating conflict, you are choosing to protect your mental and emotional well-being. This isn't weakness or avoidance. It's a powerful way to communicate that you value peace and self-respect more than proving a point or winning an argument. Moreover, silence creates a space for reflection, not just for you, but for the other person as well. When you don't respond immediately with anger or defensiveness, the other person is often left to reconsider their words and actions. This space can lead to self-awareness and change, which is far more productive than escalating tension with heated texts. Choosing silence also models emotional intelligence. It teaches those around you that it's okay to take a moment before reacting, to process emotions fully, and to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. This modeling can inspire healthier communication patterns, not just in your relationships, but in your wider community. In addition, silence preserves your integrity. Angry texts, no matter how justified they may feel at the moment, often come with regret. They can damage relationships, create misunderstandings, and tarnish your own sense of self. When you choose silence, you protect your integrity by not saying things you might later regret. You're choosing to respond from a place of clarity and calm, which ultimately strengthens your relationships and your self-respect. Finally, silence's strength is a form of empowerment. It's reclaiming control over your emotional landscape, refusing to be dictated by others' provocations or your own reactive impulses. It allows you to move through conflict with grace, preserving your peace and dignity no matter the circumstances. In a world where noise is constant and instant reactions are expected, choosing silence is a radical act of strength. It shows that you are centered, grounded, and in control. It proves that true power doesn't come from volume or aggression, but from calm, measured responses and unwavering self-respect. And that kind of strength, quiet, steady, and unshakable, is the kind that truly moves mountains. In the end, silence isn't weakness. It's one of the strongest tools you can wield in communication and in life. While angry texts erupt from impulse and emotion, silence is a conscious choice rooted in self-awareness, emotional discipline, and respect for yourself and others. It gives you space to reflect, to set clear boundaries, and to protect your peace. It diffuses conflict rather than fueling it, and invites growth rather than deepening wounds. Silence speaks volumes because it shows strength. maturity and control, qualities that words alone often fail to convey. When you embrace silence over anger, you don't just avoid unnecessary drama. You create the foundation for healthier relationships, deeper understanding, and a more empowered, peaceful you. Ultimately, it's not what you say in the heat of the moment that defines you. It's the wisdom to know when to speak and, more importantly, when to remain silent.